Well, good morning, everybody. This is Barry Jones with SP History. We're continuing our series on the deep state. And of course, we've defined the deep state as the national security apparatus and all the corporations that feed it. The definition itself implies a blend of public and private sector. The national security apparatus includes the Pentagon, the CIA, the FBI, our national government. That's the public sector. But it also includes the corporations that feed it. Those are private sector. And as such, the mixture of private and public sector incorporates into the public sector the Ultra Vires doctrine, which has three tenets. First, the maximization of profits or benefits. Second, the disregarding of public interest. In fact, public interest is a fireable offense in the private sector if you're considering the public interest over the maximization of profits. When that bleeds into the national government, into the public sector, you have a completely different spin on what representative government really is. The third tenet of Ultra Vires is the immunization from liability of all the parties involved. And I think you're going to see as we go forward, but the public sector has taken its lessons. It has learned its lessons well from the private sector, how to incorporate Ultra Vires into the public sector. As long as there was a line of distinction between public and private, at least the American people had some semblance, whether it was based in reality or not, but some semblance of hope that at least the public sector represented the people and they had a voice. But as soon as the private sector and this deep state influence that came out of the private sector sort of took over the public sector after World War II, that veneer or that appearance of popular sovereignty went away. And everything that the deep state did operated under the principle of Ultra Vires: maximization of benefits, disregarding of public interest, immunization of all the parties involved. So that is a very important concept to understand of the deep state going forward. Another definition that we've incorporated into this series is the definition of treason. Treason also has three parts. First is the aiding and abetting of one's enemy. Second is the betrayal of one's country. And third is the overthrow and or assassination of one's own government and or king or president. Any one of those three components qualifies as treason. So as we get into this lesson today, which I believe is one of the most important in the study of the deep state and its role in the assassination of JFK, keep in mind that the deep state, what it means, who's involved, the national security apparatus, all the corporations that feed it. Keep in mind the doctrine of Ultra Vires and how public interest is completely disregarded, all about maximizing benefits and all the parties that are involved, whether it's a legal act or an illegal act, whether it's a treacherous act or not, whether it's a treasonous act or not. All the parties involved are always immunized. And then lastly, keep in mind the three definitions of treason. So far, as we've been going through these covert ops, we have seen that this deep state is very willing to commit treason, even before the CIA was created. You know, in the days after World War II, when the OSS was winding down and we had no CIA, you had guys like Allen Dulles and John Foster Dulles who were creating foreign policy on their own, and they were unelected. They weren't the president. In Operation Sunrise, we saw a secret peace deal reached between Allen Dulles and very prominent German Nazis who otherwise would have gone to Nuremberg as war criminals. He got them off the hook. Why? Because they served a benefit to him and his clients. They could protect the assets of their big businesses, that they had all these business arrangements that they had negotiated through Brown Brothers Harriman and Sullivan and Cromwell prior to the war. They were at risk at the end of the war, and they needed prominent Nazis who could make sure that these facilities and this infrastructure and all these investments that flowed out of America under the protection of guys like John Foster and Allen Dulles would be protected after the war was over. And in exchange, he negotiated an escape route for them so they would not have to stand trial at Nuremberg. That is treason by definitions 1 and 2, a betrayal of one's country and aiding and abetting the enemy. Then we saw Operation Paperclip, again negotiated by John Foster and Allen Dulles to maximize benefits to the Americans going forward in the new Cold War against the Soviets, to sneak Nazis into America who had experience with rockets, who had experience with medical research, who had experience in all these different biological and chemical weapons, and on it went. In order to maximize those benefits, Ultra Vires, he completely disregarded what was right, what was wrong, the public interest of them going to trial, standing trial for their war crimes, and aided and abetted the enemy, again, sneaking them into the United States. So again, operating under Ultra Vires, committing treason yet again. We've seen the CIA, after it was formed in 1947, go on literally a rampage around the world, overthrowing governments. In Italy in 1948, in Iran with Operation Ajax in 1953, in Guatemala, Operation PB Success, 1954, and in Cuba, Operation 40, beginning in 1959 and 1960 and continuing on. And of course, these were operations to benefit their benefactors back home in the States. It wasn't just about stopping the spread of communism. In fact, it had very little to do with it, if anything. It was all about benefiting United Fruit in Guatemala, the oil companies in Iran. Italy, you could make a case, was about stopping the spread of communism. But Cuba, it was all about benefiting the oil companies, the utility companies, the mining interest, the sugar companies, Pepsi-Cola, Coca-Cola, even the entertainment industry in Operation 40, which continued into the Kennedy administration in 1961 with the Bay of Pigs. You know, these are all efforts to overthrow, in most cases, duly elected governments and replace them with American puppets that would benefit these American companies back home. We've seen operations of psychological warfare, some against innocent civilians. Operation Bluebird started in Korea against Korean war prisoners of war, and then that transitioned into MK Ultra against literally Vietnamese citizens, of which we killed 40,000 during our psychological experiments, you want to call it that, against the Vietnamese population. When those two wars ended, we didn't have a ready supply of victims to do our research on. We brought it home to the United States and began conducting our research against civilians, prisoners, and inmates in prisons, soldiers, college students. The list was long, against whom we conducted this research. And later, the CIA had to admit its wrongdoing and settle with these families after having successfully broken the brains of these young, innocent, unwitting victims. So psychological warfare. And of course, MK Ultra included another facet, which was the Phoenix program. We'll get into in a second. And that was the program under the umbrella of MK Ultra, which literally killed 40,000 Vietnamese citizens. We've seen efforts by the CIA to propagandize the American people. That started in 1957 with Operation Mockingbird. And to date, as far as we know, it is still the only operation that has no end date on it, meaning it is still operating today. And that was an effort to control the information, the textbooks, the history books, regular books and publishing companies, news media, whether it was print, radio, or television. Control all the information American people received, and up to including now today, social media like Twitter or X or Facebook and and YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. So what we're seeing is a willingness by the CIA to break the law. It is not supposed to operate domestically, and yet MK Ultra, it is operating domestically by conducting its research against innocent American citizens. It is also conducting its Operation Mockingbird on domestic soil by controlling the news media here and propagandizing the American people. It is a literal operation against the American people. Then we saw another operation which was designed to raise money and depopulate a certain demographic in America simultaneously, and that was through the drug running from the Far East into Cuba and eventually into the inner cities of America. They call it the French Connection. This is one of the reasons why we were so concerned about who was in control of Cuba, because we needed our puppet there to help facilitate this heroin trade. And that was underneath the umbrella again of the Phoenix program, which was simultaneously interested in raising money for the CIA to carry out these covert ops and also depopulating or at least controlling the population of inner city African Americans, which is where the heroin was targeted for those inner cities. We've seen cases of assassination or extraordinary rendition, whereby the CIA killed or set up to be killed Jesus de Galindez from the Dominican Republic in 56. The same year, his pilot, Gerald Murphy. In 60, we began making repeated efforts to kill Castro. I told you the story of Marita Lorenz. I told you the story of Nixon and the S-Force creating an assassination team to take out Castro. That was also in 60. And then, of course, in 61, the assassination of Patrice Lumumba in the Congo. And then in 61 also, a very startling revelation to discover that the American CIA participated in a plot to kill Charles de Gaulle of France. And when confronted, Kennedy denied it, any knowledge of any involvement in the CIA, but when he investigated, he had to report back to de Gaulle. De Gaulle was right, that it had been sponsored by the CIA and that he had lost control of his own government. We've also seen operations to control or interfere in elections. The 1960 election, for example, the CIA took an active interest in the result of that election and decided if they could lie to Kennedy, they could control him. And when he bought the lie about the missile gap and went out and campaigned and then won election on a missile gap lie, the CIA thought they had their man, their mark, and that they could forevermore control him. And so here you see evidence where the CIA got involved in a domestic election and helped turn the tide in JFK's favor. So I think what we've shown here so far to date is a couple of things. A willingness by the CIA to set foreign policy. They're not waiting for the president who's supposed to set foreign policy. They're making up foreign policy on their own. And the president is put in a position where he has to react to the CIA and to these covert operations and to these deep state operators who are deciding to invade and try to overthrow the government of Iran, for example, who are deciding on their own to invade and or to overthrow the government of Guatemala, for example. You could add Cuba to the list. It goes on and on. And when they get in trouble and the operations are going south, not going well, they can go to the president and force him to send in the U.S. military to back them up. So instead of the president setting the foreign policy, in these cases, the CIA, which means Alan Dulles and his brother, John Foster Dulles, they are setting the foreign policy. And the president is reacting to the needs that they have to follow through on that foreign policy. So that's one thing that we're seeing. Another thing we're seeing is a willingness by the CIA to flaunt the law. They are not supposed to, according to the Charter and the 47 National Security Act, they are not supposed to act domestically. And yet in Mockingbird, that is exactly what they're doing. In MK Ultra, that is exactly what they're doing. In the 1960 election interference, that is exactly what they're doing. They are not supposed to, by law, be involved in the assassination of foreign heads of state. And yet, as we learned in their Operation Executive Action, They not only are involved in the assassination of foreign heads of state, they have successfully carried out several of those to date, and they're continuing on that path going forward. Uh, it is also those are at least three things we've learned. Another thing we've learned is that the CIA is very willing to accept the help of Nazis who have used concentration camp victims upon whom they have conducted this medical research to conduct their own medical research. As an extension of the German mind control program, we created our own mind control program and used our own pool of helpless victims, either Korean War POWs or Vietnamese citizens, and later American unwitting, unsuspecting citizens, upon whom to conduct our own research, to break their brains and try to control them, make them into automatons by whom, through a compilation of LSD and hypnosis, we can control their actions, their behaviors. It was the ultimate, it's like Alan Dulles called it MK Ultra, because it was the ultra weapon. If you can control people's brains, if you can control people's behaviors and them have no control, you can force them to do things that they ordinarily not do, and then they have no memory of it. That is the ultimate weapon. There are so many things to learn about the CIA being a rogue agency. It's clear it's become a rogue agency. And why are we surprised to become a rogue agency when it is led by a rogue operator himself, Alan Dulles? The CIA literally took on the character of its director and has become a rogue agency. That leads us to today's topic, which is the Operation ZR Rifle. And this is an operation many researchers, I believe, get completely wrong. I believe they conflate ZR Rifle with executive action as if it was one assassination program. It was not. It was two. It was distinguished from executive action very clearly from its objectives, its field of operations, and from its targets. It's a completely separate assassination program. And if you conflate the two, you miss a big part of what happened in Dallas, November 22nd, 1963. A big part. So it's my goal to present this material today, Operation ZR Rifle, so you will understand there is a difference between these two assassinations. This is a second assassination program, unique from the first. I would recommend, as a point of reference, that you read Mary Haverstick's book called A Woman I Know. A lot of the information I have gleaned for this episode comes from her book, not all, but a lot of it. And she got access to and actually got to interview and actually developed a relationship with the primary agent in this Operation ZR Rifle, when she was able to wade through all the code names and all the cover names and figure out who the primary agent was. That wasn't easy. It took years of research and effort on her part. I would highly recommend this book. All right. So what was ZR Rifle? The first thing I think we need to understand is this project was born literally 6 days after JFK took office. On January 26, 1991, a 9-page handwritten document by CIA officers William Harvey and Arnold Silver put together the ideas behind this and the objectives for this operation. That leads me to the second thing that we should understand about this operation. Any operation that had William Harvey's name attached to it, it had his participation in it, indicates that this program was an assassination program. That was his expertise. That was what he did. In every situation he's involved with the CIA, it ultimately always came back to assassination. He was involved in executive action. He was also involved in this program, ZR Rifle. Remember, two separate programs. All right. So first, it's created 6 days after JFK took office. Second, it's clearly an assassination program because of the guy who was involved in the writing, the creation documents, William Harvey. In the first paragraph, we learn the difference between ZR Rifle and executive action. This should not be difficult. I don't understand why researchers don't talk about this more or don't understand the distinction between these two programs. It is clearly laid out in the first paragraph of the creation document, whereby it says, we already know what executive action was. It was an assassination program targeting foreign heads of state utilizing foreign either mercenaries or hired guns. A lot of times they were foreign criminals. And in order to give the CIA plausible deniability and a buffer layer between them and the assassination itself, they would hire third-party people to carry it out for them. But the important thing about executive action is that the targets, it was a European program, and its targets were foreign heads of state, and its actors were foreign mercenaries or hired guns or foreign criminals. Okay, that is the basic setup of executive action. ZR rifle distinction was set up so as that it would include agents that were in the United States. And in fact, the paragraph reads, agents will be spotted in several areas, including the United States. What that means is the United States is a field of operations for ZR rifle, potentially. Doesn't mean it is for sure, but it is potentially, it is a field of operations for this assassination program. In other words, ZR rifle was being planned for America. Now that is a blatant violation of the law. They're not supposed to be operating domestically, but I'm highlighting this because it shows the distinction between executive action and ZR rifle. Executive action was foreign, used foreign mercenaries, and had foreign targets. ZR rifle was American, had American targets, and as we will see, will use CIA assets, known and tested, documented CIA assets. We'll get to that in a minute. So there's a clear distinction between these two operations. The cover story, as these operations always include a cover story, was code stealing. Harvey even said so as much, and in testimony later said, quote, the code stealing story, while partially true, had a dual purpose. If ZR rifle had actually recruited an agent for assassination, or the targeting of any target, or the mounting of an operation, it would have been under this code stealing as a cover. And as I mentioned earlier, this was Harvey's brainchild, and as such, according to the documents, it's housed in Harvey's Special Activities Division D. Of course, Division D only had one purpose, and that was assassination. So it came right out of Division D, was authored by Harvey, the head of Division D, and according to the document's first paragraph, the project's target, and it was a singular target, and in no place in any of these ZR rifle documents does it indicate multiple targets. It was always a singular target, but his name would never be discussed. In other words, there would never be any place in the ZR rifle documents, if they were ever discovered, where the target's name would be there identifying for all to see whom the CIA was trying to kill. Right? It was such a high value target, they wouldn't even mention his name. The finances for this operation were routed through Luxembourg Station. There's a CIA station in Luxembourg. Luxembourg offered a very secretive banking system, not unlike Switzerland, by the way, that enabled hidden payments to anonymous participants. You could hide where the money was coming from, and you could disguise where the money was going, to whom it was going. The project was signed off twice, once in its initiation and second in its renewal phase by the CIA's Deputy Director of Plans, who granted full authority to William Harvey and Silver to run this. Over the 3 years that this program was in operation, 2 different DDPs signed off on this project. First, it was Richard Bissell, and secondly, it was Richard Helms. Richard Helms went on later to become the director of the CIA. As such, since it was a CIA program, it also had to be signed off on by the director. According to the creation document, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency officially advised, quote, that was the words used in the document, Harvey and Silver in the creation of this program. The question was, who was the DCI when the ZR rifle was created? Alan Dulles. So there's that name again. So here we've learned that this is not a rogue program off the books that only a few people know about. Maybe only a few people who know about it, but it's not rogue. This is signed off. It's gone through the channels, the proper channels, uh, including the DDPs, which are the deputies, and eventually the DCI, which is the director. Has all the right signatures. It's put under Division D, run by Harvey for the purposes of assassination. According to the creation document, ZR rifle will only use tested assets. This is another distinction between it and executive action. Executive action, as I noted previously, would use foreign mercenaries, hired guns, or foreign criminals to carry out hits on foreign heads of state. ZR rifle will only use CI assets on their target here in America. That is a big distinction. They're keeping it in-house. Secondly, ZR rifle, quote, should include provisions for blaming the Soviets or the Czechs in case of blow, which means if it goes bad, if it goes south, if for some reason there's blowback, they should have a cover story prepared in advance that places the blame on a CIA asset who has come under Soviet control. It will include the use of a false file, a CIA 201 file, personnel file, and it would be under the heading of, quote, Russian Intelligence Service, RIS, which implies that this Russian asset or this CIA asset has come under Soviet control. Of course, this is all going to be headed by the CIA counterintelligence chief, James Angleton. That's his specialty. The question is, would blaming the Soviets work? This is a false flag, is what it is. Would blaming the Soviets work if the target was Castro? Yeah, I think a lot of people assume whenever there was an assassination program during this era, 50s, 60s, mainly the 60s, the target was always Castro. We already have a program called executive action aimed at foreign heads of state, which would include Castro. Would blaming the Soviets work if the target was Castro in this case? And of course, the obvious answer is no, because the Soviets and Castro were on the same team. Why would the Soviets be why would they want to assassinate Castro? Second question is, would blaming the Soviets work if the target was an American on American soil? And that is most assuredly yes. This is the false flag part of this, where if you wanted to set somebody up in advance and sheep dip him, this CIA asset, to have the inference of being compromised by the Soviets, then afterwards, when you arrest him and he's the patsy and you're blaming him for this assassination, and he has Russian ties in his past all over him, it's going to be very easy to point the finger of blame at that of either the Soviets or the Cubans, and that is the purpose. Indeed, that is the purpose. Interestingly, Lee Harvey Oswald, 10 days after these documents were drawn up, so you're talking about early February 1961, Oswald petitioned for his return to America. It's interesting, people who still think Oswald legitimately defected to Russia or tried to defect to Russia, and in doing so, pledged to renounce his American citizenship and give military secrets to the Russians. And yet here he is petitioning for his return to America, which would later be granted and even paid for by the State Department with no recriminations, no trial for treason, nothing. And those same people with a straight face will tell you, oh, he was not a CIA asset. He was just an American citizen gone bad. There is no world in which that is possible during the height of the Cold War for a former Marine with top secret security clearances to defect to the Cold War enemy, Soviet Union, promising to give military secrets, pledging to renounce his citizenship, asking for permission to return to the United States and not face a trial. It's not possible. It's literally impossible unless you are a part of a CIA program I apologize. I got a lawnmower going by my camper right now, so if you can hear that, I apologize. But uh, now, if you're a CIA asset, you've been involved in a fake defector program, spying on the Russians and carrying out a mission in Russia, then yes, certainly you can be admitted back into the United States because, in contrast to being a traitor, you're actually a patriot. You've been doing your duty. Anyway, cover stories always work best when they make sense. And when you realize that the ZR rifle creation documents establish a program whereby a patsy would be blamed for this assassination, a patsy that had Russian ties or could be tied to some kind of Soviet uh, compromising operation. Uh, it's very clear when you look at Oswald asking for his permission to return 10 days after these creation documents are drawn up, that the patsy that they have in mind is a current CIA asset who already has, vis-a-vis his prior CIA assignment to go to Russia as a fake defector, he already has Russian connections. In fact, he's going to come back with a Russian wife, a child. Uh, his trip to Russia was well documented, with a few little other efforts to sheep dip him in the summer of '63 in New Orleans, for example. It'll be a slam dunk. When we arrest this guy, he'll have the stink of Russia, the stink of communism, the stink of Marxism, the stink of Cuba Marxism all over him. And the American people will be so drawn by that, the diversion of this patsy and his background, that the perpetrators of this assassination will walk away unscathed, immunizing themselves according to the Ultra Vires doctrine. The documents continue. They say this operation will include the use of a staffer for the direct action. So not only will they use a CIA asset to be the patsy, they will also use a CIA staffer or asset to carry out the direct action. Of course, a direct action means a straightforward killing. That's what that is. So the meaning here is the trigger man or the trigger woman might be a staff agent rather than a hired gun like usual. So ZR rifle essentially was a straightforward assassination operation, killing, supervised by CIA officers, Harvey and Silver, signed off on by Allen Dulles, Bissell, and who was the other one? Richard Helms, and enacted by a CIA staff agent. Whoever the person chosen to be the assassin is going to be a CIA asset, and including a CIA asset to be the patsy. Now, it's going to make it look like another person or country is guilty of the crime, which is textbook definition of Operation Northwoods. Now, we haven't got to Operation Northwoods yet. That's coming next. But just a quick sneak peek. Operation Northwoods was presented to Kennedy in '62 as an operation to carry out terrorist acts, operations against American citizens on American soil, and blame Cuba for it, which would justify, in the eyes of the American people, an invasion of Cuba afterwards. Kennedy laughed it off, but that's exactly what the JFK assassination was. You think about it. Is there a more prominent American target than an American president? It happened on American soil in Dallas, and who was immediately arrested and blamed? A patsy who had ties to Cuba and Russia, who claimed to be a Marxist. And I mean, if you go back and look at some of my JFK assassination episodes on my other YouTube channel, which is titled Standards Plus History Academy, I go into great length and a great detail all of the connections that were sheep dipped onto Oswald back to Russia and back to Cuba. Efforts were made so that the American people would lay the blame at the feet of either Cuba or Russia for the assassination of their president. That was the whole point of it. So this is a CIA operation through and through. The code name for this second CIA assassination program. Remember, executive action was the first, ZR rifle was the second. ZR indicates Division D, from which this operation would be tasked. Of course, this is William Harvey's division, and this division is responsible solely for assassination programs. So it's clear what the agenda is. The word rifle is the operation's chosen descriptive word. It's interesting. It's sort of a tell, indicating that it's going to include a rifle to conduct this assassination. Assassinations were normally carried out close range hits, but for example, when the S-Force was created, the triangular training, the triangular fire squad was trained to use long, high-powered rifles with scopes, shooting at a target from distance, a moving target from distance, and because they couldn't get close to Castro. So what they're saying here is that we're going to have to use rifles to take a long-range shot at our target in America, as well as just like we are at Castro in Cuba, because we can't get close to them. So whoever the target is, we can't get close enough to use a 38 or a handgun or even poison. We're going to have to use high-powered rifles with scopes and fire from distance. That involves a rifle. According to the documentation, ZR rifle was one of the longest, most complex operations conducted by this specialized team, which means it's not one of the longest running CIA operations. It's one of the longest running operations from Division D, which was tasked with assassinating targets. So as far as assassination operations are concerned, this was the longest and most complex of them all. It spanned literally the duration of JFK's presidency. I'll give you the dates here in a minute. As we've learned earlier, it's officially headed up by Harvey and Silver, but again, it's under the auspices, under the direction of Allen Dulles and the deputies. Now, when Frank Church discovered a lot of this in '75 during the Church committee hearings, he was thinking that executive action, as scandalous as that was, he was thinking, well, wait a second, is this part of executive action, or is this separate from executive action? And that was what he wanted to get to the bottom of. And in doing so, he posed this question to the person on the stand representing the agency, quote, if the CIA already had a separately named Operation Executive Action to assassinate unfriendly foreign heads of state, what was the purpose of ZR rifle? And that's when he began to understand the truth of this matter, was that we didn't just have one assassination program, scandalous as that might be, we had two. And worse, this one was on American soil, targeting an American target. And in contrast to the foreign operation, which used foreigners, this was going to use CIA assets. They're both CIA operations, but this one was even more CIA than the executive action one was. And of course, it's all illegal. Assassinating people is against the law, and the CIA is not supposed to operate on domestic soil. And yet they are. The Church hearings were just a revelation, because we got access to what they call the family jewels. These are the internal CIA documents that Colby and Schlesinger, two consecutive CIA directors, handed over. It's a miracle we ever got our hands on these, but these two CIA directors should be commended for handing them over. And they did. And in Harvey's own handwritten notes, ZR rifle was an American program recruiting American assets for direct personal action against an American target. Harvey left no doubt. The only thing he left out was the name of the target, but he left no doubt as to how this was going to be carried out and how this operation differed from executive action. And I told you I'd give you the dates. Look at the dates. We call them synchronicities. This is what we call, it's not physical evidence, but it is circumstantial evidence as to who the target is. We already learned that the creation document itself was written out by Harvey and Silver 6 days after JFK took office. The program itself officially began in May of 61, 5 months after JFK took office. This is right after Bay of Pigs. That is not a coincidence, folks. ZR rifle officially ended in April of 64, 5 months after JFK was assassinated. That was not a coincidence. I think it's clear who the target was. The target was President John F. Kennedy. All right, this is where Haverstick's persistence really provides us with an inside look into the mechanics of this operation. She was on this hunt, this sort of treasure hunt, to find out who QJ Wynn was. According to the documents of ZR Rifle, the primary agent was codenamed QJ Wynn and was a pilot, a CIA pilot. Now, she was operating under the assumption, as most people would, that it was a man. But the CIA threw a curveball. It turns out QJ Wynn was a woman, which allowed this agent to fly under the radar and carry out a lot of the facets of this mission without arousing any suspicion. Who would suspect a woman, right? She had a background at NASA. She was a pilot, but she was a woman. And in those days, this was a man's world. Intelligence was a man's world. And so, but this person was chosen particularly because she was a woman and would fly under the radar, such that she did. Anyway, the reason it was so difficult to track her down or track this person down is because of all the code names and cover names. We're going to get into it here in a minute, but the agent's name turned out to be June Cobb. But sometimes in the paper, and when Haverstick was doing her research, the person would be named Jerry Cobb. So she thought, well, there must be another Cobb, maybe they're sisters, whatever. Turns out it's the same person using two different names. But she also had an alias named June Corwin. So sometimes the person she was researching, whom she suspected was the same, all these were all one and the same person, were using all these different names. June Cobb, Jerry Cobb, June Corwin. And then she discovered through looking into the CIA and its codes and its procedures for setting up codes for its agents, she discovered a pattern. And the pattern was they incorporate oftentimes parts of the name into the code. And what she discovered was QJ Wynn takes the first initial from the name June and the last three letters from her last name, Corwin, which was an alias, and creates a code name, QJ Wynn. This was a revelatory moment for Mary Haverstick to realize, once she realized that June and Jerry Cobb were the same person, and that this same person had an alias named June Corwin, and she figured out that June Corwin was, according to CIA protocols, codenamed QJ Wynn, she now knew who the primary agent of ZR Rifle was. It took years for her to discover all that, by the way. I hope I explained that clearly. But she had to wade through a lot of cover names, a lot of aliases to get to the code name, to get to the real person. As such, the base of operations for ZR Rifle was also codenamed, quote, Germany, which she discovered to be Texas. The ZR Rifle field of operations was codenamed Baden-Baden, which was actually Dallas-Fort Worth. Both names have hyphens. In the code names, they kept the hyphen to replicate the real name. So what Mary Haverstick has done is she has figured out who the primary agent was. And there's going to be some cross-checking here in a minute where you'll see corroboration of how we know she was the primary agent. There'll be some corroboration here in a minute. So she's discovered who the primary agent was. She's discovered where the base of operations was for this particular operation. We already know ZR Rifle is an assassination program to take out an American target on American soil using CIA assets. Well, this primary agent is a CIA asset. Texas is American soil, as is Baden-Baden or Dallas-Fort Worth. So now we know where, and of course, this is the home of the most famous assassination in the history of the world, basically, right before this operation closes down. So again, circumstantially, it becomes very clear who the target here is. Should be, anyway. A synchronicity that helps circumstantially prove who that June Cobb or Jerry Cobb or June Corwin or QJ Wynn was the primary agent is the fact that according to ZR Rifle documents, she was relocated or assigned to Mexico City in June of 1961. This is the headquarters for the ZR Rifle program. It is the closest CIA station that is non-US to Dallas. This is the closest to Dallas. And this is a very handy location from which QJ Wynn could manage the operation before she actually has to travel to the field of operations itself. So she was assigned to this station in Mexico City in 61, June, which is 1 month after the operation officially began. Coincidence? I don't think so. When it was time for QJ Wynn to relocate again, this time to the field of operations, which would be Dallas-Fort Worth, she relocated in 1963 to Dallas-Fort Worth. And we know that according to Bell Helicopter's own personnel records, a Jerry Cobb was hired at the same time that QJ Wynn relocated to the, quote, field of operations. The documents say, quote, QJ Wynn has found cover employment in the field of operations. The cover employment was Bell Helicopter, which was a notorious CIA front company, pictured here at the top. This is on the outskirts of Dallas. And the field of operations is Dallas-Fort Worth. So we know in 1963 that this primary agent, QJ Wynn, who sometimes goes by June Cobb, sometimes Jerry Cobb, sometimes June Corwin, under the name Jerry Cobb, got a cover job at Bell Helicopter to explain why she was in Dallas-Fort Worth, a cover job. Now, Bell Helicopter simultaneously was also serving as cover jobs for Michael Payne and his wife Ruth, whose sister also worked for the CIA, Ruth's sister. And of course, if you're unfamiliar with Michael and Ruth Payne, they were the CIA handlers for Lee and Marina Oswald in the days and weeks prior to the assassination. I do several episodes on all the handlers that Lee Harvey Oswald had in the year of 63. A synchronicity, sort of like a corresponding piece of evidence or a circumstantial piece of evidence. ZR Rifle ended in May of 64, as we noted before. And on that date, or during that period, QJ Wynn received a large payout, which served as her payment for services rendered for the 3 years of this operation. So we have a lot of circumstantial evidence that points to QJ Wynn as the primary agent. This is a real person. Her name was June Cobb. And now Mary Haverstick is on the search for the real person, June Cobb. By the way, I have pictured here the second picture is a Texas School Book Depository. During her time, their time as Marina and Lee's handlers, Ruth Payne helped Lee Harvey Oswald get the job that he needed to be the patsy in the assassination at this Texas School Book Depository. It was Ruth Payne who helped facilitate that. The bottom picture is a kitchen snapshot of Lee Harvey Oswald's mother, pictured on the left, Marina Oswald, pictured on the right. Looks like she's bent over ironing clothes there, little baby girl. And then Ruth Payne standing at what looks like the sink. They were living together during the time that Oswald was living at his rooming house right before the assassination and after it happened. This was an effort by the Paynes, the CIA, to keep Marina and Lee apart. And they needed a husband and wife handler team to do that. And Michael and Ruth Payne fulfilled that uh, purpose perfectly. In the years that it took Mary Haverstick to find the real June Cobb, she finally did. She finally located her and spent several years just trying to uh, nurse a relationship with her, not asking her any questions about Dallas, not asking her any questions about QJ Win or ZR Rifle or anything. She just wanted to establish rapport and a relationship and gain some level of trust from June, who lived alone and was sort of an iconoclast personality and was very uh, closed mouthed with her past. And it took years to uh, gain the trust of June Cobb, such as to the point where she would confide in Mary Haverstick anything uh, important. It took years. It was quite an effort by Haverstick. Anyway, uh, when the time arrived and Mary Haverstick was able to confront June Cobb with what she knew, she was simultaneously facilitating this relationship, building this relationship with June. At the same time, she was researching June. She was researching ZR Rifle. She was researching all of the elements involved in this so that when that moment came and she could confront June finally, she would have the facts behind her, know the questions to ask. So she did. And in the sequence of that conversation, June Cobb admitted to Mary Haverstick that she was indeed in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. She was at Redbird Airfield at the outskirts. You see it here pictured. See how far away it is from the main city. A nice little small airfield from which she was sitting in a CIA plane, idling the plane on the runway, waiting for a special passenger, is what she called him. She said, I was supposed to pick up a special passenger and fly him away. And the special passenger never arrived. I had to eventually leave the airport without the special passenger. And Mary Haverstick didn't believe for years that June sat there. She just found it unbelievable that she just sat there in an airplane, a CIA, unmarked CIA plane on Redbird Airfield for all that time. Meanwhile, just a few minutes away, the history was being made, the assassination of JFK. And according to June Cobb, there were reporters on the plane with her, Life from Life magazine. And nobody left the plane. That's her story. And Mary Haverstick just didn't believe it. She thought somehow she snuck away from the plane, went downtown Dallas. Maybe she was the babushka lady. She was down there on Dealey Plaza. Why would the primary agent of the assassination program to kill JFK not be on the scene on the day and at the time when JFK was assassinated? Nevertheless, the evidence points to the fact that June was where she said she was, in that plane, waiting for that special passenger, because that was part of the operation, a very important part of the operation. It just didn't go the way it was planned, demonstrating that not everything went according to plan that day. Now, it's interesting because when you take the story of June Cobb, or primary agent QJ Win, and you slot it into, like a puzzle piece, into the puzzle, it corresponds exactly with the testimony or the confession of one Roscoe White. Roscoe White, after he died, his kids found a like a footlocker, and in the footlocker were several documents, and they found out that their daddy had been involved in a lot more than they ever realized. He was a CIA, essentially a CIA asset, a hitman who killed lots of people. He admitted to it. And one of the people he had killed, according to his own confession, was JFK. I'm just going to read you the confession. Now, this was buttressed by his identity as an intelligence asset was actually buttressed by 3 additional documents in the footlocker, which were O&I documents, Office of Naval Intelligence. One of them was addressed, or 3 of them. The first one was addressed, I think it was like in June or July of '63, ordering Roscoe to go to Texas, and they would let him know the field of operations. It was probably going to be Dallas. They named a couple other places, but they said prepare for this operation. And then the second O&I memo was basically telling him to that his position within the Dallas Police Department has been secured as cover for his role in the operation. And then thirdly, the third memo was addressed to him and said, stay in Dallas. This was a month after the assassination. Stay in Dallas because we may have some loose ends we need you to tie up, meaning witnesses we need you to silence. All 3 of these memos were addressed to Mandarin. Mandarin was his O&I code name. So every time you see the name Mandarin, understand that that is Roscoe White. That is his O&I code name. So in addition to these 3 O&I memos, they've now discovered that their father was a CIA asset, a killer, was this confession. And it read as follows, quote, 11/22/63. Lebanon was on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. Lebanon, we now know, was Mac Wallace, LBJ's hitman. Saul was in the records building. Saul, we now know, was Charles Nicoletti from the Chicago crime family. And this is all from addition. We know Mac Wallace was in the 6th floor because his fingerprint was found there. The only fingerprint that would be admissible in a court of law. We know it was Charles Nicoletti. Witnesses saw his face in the window. And then he says Mandarin was behind the stockade fence. Well, of course, we've already learned that Mandarin was Roscoe White. In other words, he's talking about himself. And then he goes into the progression of events. He says, quote, shots were fired from the upper buildings for diversion. We already learned that the CIA learned from John Mulholland the art of diversion. So the first shots were intended to get everybody's attention while the kill shot came from behind the stockade fence. That's the point of it. Shots fired, target hit. You remember when the president emerges from behind the Stevens freeway sign, he's already been hit in the neck, then he gets hit in the back. These are from all his spots, not including the stockade fence. So he has been hit. Shots from fence, which is Mandarin, definite hit. You saw his head blow up. Man on other side of fence in the way. The man he is referring to, most people assume, would be Gordon Arnold, the guy who was standing there in front of the stockade fence, using his camera to film. Shots again from upper building, no hit. Target open, fired, definite hit. Gun retrieved by man to the side. He had a spotter. I believe that was Tippett. I believe Tippett was his spotter, which is why he had to be taken out later. Took to the rail car area, and then I whirled over the fence, took man down to protect myself. Now, there is a lot of question about this part right here because there was a pool of blood on the concrete pergola on the grassy knoll, and this indicates that Roscoe White killed somebody to protect himself. Somebody must have seen him, or he was a witness, whatever. He had to take him out. I have no idea who that is. I have no idea what happened to that person, but I do know that people discovered a pool of blood on that concrete area there by the pergola. So it says he whirled over the fence, took man down to protect myself, ran around back of fence, down embankment to the car. Witnesses like Ed Hoffman said they saw Suit Man, which is what he called him, somebody in what looked like a police uniform, run down the embankment and get in a waiting car in front of Dealey Plaza and zoom away. This is exactly what Roscoe White is saying. He drove to Oak Cliff, met officer, told officer not to drive by house. Something was wrong. Forced to take out officer at 10th and Patton. This is a Tippett. And so what we're seeing here in this confession is we now know who the killer of JFK was, and also Tippett. It's this guy, Roscoe White, and he's a CIA guy. Backtracked the car, drove back to the area to take out other passenger, and this is the important part relevant to today's discussion. Failed to transport subject to Redbird. Realized what a mistake I had made. back to DPD awaiting information. In other words, Roscoe White was given 2 jobs that day. The first job was to fire at the president, if necessary, from behind the stockade fence, and he did that successfully. The second job was to get to Oak Cliff with, I believe, the Oswald double. We'll get into that in just a minute. And as such, take out the only conspirator in this Dealey Plaza hanky-panky that was not CIA, and that was Tippit. They wanted to keep this all in-house. So the spotter for Roscoe White was a fellow Dallas police officer, J.D. Tippit, but he was not CIA like Roscoe. And so he took him out. And I believe that was, and he had the Oswald double with him so as to have him on the scene so that people would associate the killing of J.D. Tippit with Oswald. And that would necessitate or justify an all points bulletin with tying the JFK killer to the Tippit killer and providing a name and providing a face which they could blast out across the news, and they would essentially have their man. It was all arranged. And Roscoe White, in his confession, talks about how it was arranged. But the thing that got my attention was when he said he failed to transport subject to Redbird. Now, before I knew anything about ZR Rifle and Mary Haverstick and June Cobb, I didn't understand what that meant. But now, when you understand that June Cobb was waiting, QJ Wynn was waiting in a plane, a CIA plane, to transport a special passenger that never arrived. And now you see Roscoe White, whose job it was to take that special passenger to Redbird, and failed in that mission. He succeeded in killing Kennedy. He failed in his second mission, which was to get that special passenger out to the plane. And so she had to take off without. So that means this special passenger still needs to be transported. The original accommodations are no longer going to work. They're gone. The plane is gone. She had to leave. So they're going to have to make alternate plans to get this special passenger out of Dallas. And that's the part of the story I want to turn to next, because I think it relates to June Cobb and what she was there for, which ties back into this whole ZR Rifle operation. And so this next part I've called Special Passenger. And this is in the aftermath of what happened at Oak Cliff, the killing of first the killing of Kennedy, and then secondly, the killing of Tippit. And it starts with the story of T.F. White. White was a 60-year-old auto mechanic employed at a garage in Oak Cliff called Mac Pate's Garage. It's literally right across the street from this restaurant you see here. Today, I was just there last week. It's no longer El Chico Spanish Mexican restaurant. Now it's like a Walgreens drugstore or something. But Mac Pate's Garage is still there. It's not called Mac Pate's, and right now it's being renovated, but you can still see the outline of the building, the shell of the building. Anyway, T.F. White is working, and he hears police sirens screaming up and down Davis Street. Now, Davis Street is right on the other side of El Chico's. It's literally 1 block away, and it runs parallel to the street that they're on. And so these police sirens, these police cars are screaming up and down throughout Oak Cliff, and so obviously he's going to notice the garage where he worked has a huge door that they just keep open. So you're working on these cars, you can see right into the building where they're working, and so all you gotta do is turn around and look out, and you can see these police cars going back and forth. He had also heard radio reports describing a suspect that they thought was in Oak Cliff. So he put 2 and 2 together. He says these cops are looking for the suspect. At about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, White noticed that there was a red Falcon, a 61 Ford Falcon, parked in the El Chico restaurant parking lot across the street, and the driver was sitting in the car. And he kept watching, and it appeared to White that the man was hiding or trying to hide, duck in his head, things of that nature. So after his lunch break, White pointed out the car to his boss, Mac Pate, and Pate told White, says, keep an eye out, because I heard a radio report of an assassination attempt against JFK the day before in Houston involving a red Falcon. So the car itself got Mac Pate's attention, the person inside the car got TF White's attention. Eventually, White couldn't stand it anymore, so he walked across the street to get a closer look. And the driver, who was wearing a white T-shirt, turned and looked at him, full, according to TF White, full face. And he said, we stared at each other for just a second. And he said, as I turned around and began walking away back to the garage, I wrote down the license plate number, PP 4537, and I put it in my pocket. And after work, he went home, and after dinner, they were watching TV, he and his wife, and they put Lee Harvey Oswald's image on the TV. And T.F. White said, my God, that's the guy I saw in the car. That's him. What he didn't realize yet, became apparent quickly thereafter, was that the real Oswald had already been arrested. And at the time, 2 o'clock, when he said he saw him sitting in that car, Oswald was sitting in a Dallas jail cell, the real Oswald. So the question is, who was this other Oswald that was sitting in this Ford Falcon that was acting suspicious, trying to hide, who looked exactly like the one that was sitting in the Dallas jail cell? All right, so that brings us to the story of Wes Wise, who was a Dallas newscaster. T.F. White tells the story to Wes Wise on December 4th. So it's about 2 weeks after the assassination. It's driving him crazy. He's trying to figure out who's the guy I saw. So he tells Wes Wise. So Wise takes the license number that T.F. White had jotted down, and he begins researching the license plate. And he finds it belongs to a man named Carl Amos Mather, who lives in 4309 Colgate Street, Garland, Texas. Garland, Texas is just a subdivision. It's just a suburb of Dallas. It's not far from where I'm sitting right now as I speak. It's a cute little town, very cute little town. Leanne Rimes is from there. They have a real cute downtown square. Anyway, I could go on about Garland, but Carl Amos Mather was from Garland, Texas. And so now he's doing research on Carl Amos Mathers, and he finds out that Mathers did high security work for, guess who? The CIA. That was his employer. He was CIA. He did security work for the CIA. He also learned that the Mathers, the husband and wife, were best friends of the Tippits, JD and his wife. So what are the odds that the car that this Oswald lookalike was sitting in belonged to a CIA man who was best friends with the victim across town? What are the odds, right? So that's T.F. White. Now let's look at Robert Vinson. Believe me, this is going somewhere, I promise. So now we have a sighting of a second Oswald, right? Believe me, there are many others, but this is the one that's pertinent to June Cobb. Remember, she's waiting for a special passenger to be delivered, and he never comes. Robert Vinson was an Air Force sergeant of the North American Air Defense Command, NORAD. And on November 21st, day before, which was a Thursday, he met with Colonel Chapman at Andrews Air Force Base in D.C., and they were talking about his promotion, filling out the paperwork, etc. While he was in Chapman's office, according to Vinson, Chapman got a phone call and engaged in a phone conversation with Vinson sitting right there. And he heard Chapman say to whoever was on the other end of the line, quote, he would highly recommend that the president not go to Dallas, Texas on Friday because there had been something reported. This is the day before. And Vinson's not taken special note of this conversation, but he does remember it. It did pique his interest a little bit. The next day, Vinson departs Andrews Air Force Base in D.C. on board a C-54 cargo plane, and he's heading for Lowry Air Force Base in Denver. His home was in Colorado Springs, so he was going home on leave. And the C-54 bore no military markings. It was a strange plane as far as he was concerned. It didn't have a serial number, no markings. The only marking it had that he remembered was a rust brown graphic of an egg-shaped Earth crossed by white grid marks. And this is a CIA plane. That is the standard marking for a CIA plane in 1963. If you're in the service, you get these free flights. They put a jump seat down for you, and you just hop on, and if it happens to be going in the direction you're going, you get a free flight. So that's what he was getting. This happened to be a CIA plane. He just took the first available. The plane itself was empty, except for Vincent and then two other men who were piloting the plane, the pilot, the co-pilot. And then, unlike any other flight he had ever taken, this is something that he noted years later. He said the flight had no manifest, no log to document that he was on board, that they were on board, where it was going, etc. He didn't have to sign it. There was no crew chief, and there was no friendly greeting from the pilots. In fact, he said, my recollection is that the pilots were very unfriendly. They met me with stony silence, he said. All right, so they're on this plane on November 22nd. This is the day in question, right? According to Vincent, as the plane was flying over Nebraska, one of the pilots announced flatly over the intercom that the president was shot, 12:29. We know it was 12:30. But he was like, oh my God, And he said immediately the plane turned around. It banked into a sharp left turn, began heading south. So instead of heading west, now it's heading south. And at 3:30, he looks out the window and he sees the Dallas skyline on the horizon. He said, we came in real low over Dallas and we landed on the other side of Dallas in a river valley. It was a rough, sandy area alongside the Trinity River. Now, if you go to Dallas today and you go across the bridge, the Trinity Bridge, from Dallas to Oak Cliff, where Oswald lived, there is the Trinity River, and there are miles and miles and miles of trails and roadways. As you can see a road there. It's the lowlands, and the only interruption to miles and miles and miles of this is a bridge every now and then. But according to Vincent, he says it wasn't really even a runway. It was more like a road under construction. And I'm telling you, folks, if you go down there today and you look, Trinity River bottoms, and they've put in walking paths and things of that nature, and there's a bunch of new bridges now. But you can see clearly where a plane, depending upon how big it is, but a plane could land on these service roads that run back and forth along the Trinity on both sides of the Trinity River. And it's flat, but it would be a rough landing, but you could do it, and you could take off as well. And I'm not saying that because I know that personally, but this has been checked out. We'll get to that in just a second. According to Vincent, two men were running towards the plane from a Jeep when they came to a stop. The pilots came back to where Vincent was sitting. They unlatched the passenger door and they waved the two men aboard. So Vincent's sitting there. He watches as the two men pass his seat. After they come aboard, they don't look at him. They don't speak to him. Both men were dressed in off-white beige coveralls, like they were highway workers, blending in with what looked like to be a construction project in this Trinity River bottoms area. Both men took their seat right behind the cockpit, and neither one said anything to Vincent or the pilots. So it was all very quiet, all very stealthy, all very quick. According to Vincent, the taller one was a Cuban or a Latino, and the shorter one was 5'7" to 5'9". He said between 150 and 160 pounds. He was Caucasian. And now I won't get into this. This is a side story, but there were multiple sightings of a Latino and an Oswald lookalike running all around Dallas in the days before the assassination. Researchers have pretty much identified who the Latino, actually two Latinos with them most of the time. It was one of them, the tall one was Leopoldo, who we later identified as Bernardo de Torres. And then the shorter one that was with him was a guy named Angel. They nicknamed him Angel. That's how they called him, and that's how they identified him, Angel. There's a story behind Angel as well. His last name was Cruz. If you're from Texas, that might ring a bell. Anyway, these two Latino Latins appeared at the Odio sisters' apartment. They were seen all around town. In this particular case, it was just Leopoldo and this what looked like there's a smaller white Caucasian man whom we're going to find out looked just like Oswald. And there's a guy named Billy Seymour who fit that description. A lot of researchers think that's who it was. Anyway, according to Vincent, it was a tall Latin and a short Caucasian. And neither one spoke or looked at him. The C-54, which had never even stopped its engines during this whole transaction, took off from the Sandy area in a northwest direction after the two passengers were aboard, and off they went. Now, Vincent's just noticing all this, watching it, not really paying close attention, other than to say, this is peculiar. I have nothing else to look at, so of course he's going to notice. A little after dusk, the plane landed finally on a runway. Now, Vincent's thinking, okay, we got off track a little bit, went down to Dallas, but now hopefully I'm in Denver so I can go home. He finds out it's completely dark, and he can't really see. After the pilots get off, Vincent thought it was unusual that the pilots disembarked before he did. Normally it's the opposite. They rushed by him, got off, and then the two passengers that were sitting right behind him rushed off and left Vincent pretty much by himself. Vincent finally gets off last, and he was after a few moments being alone on the plane, he said, boy, that was strange, very strange. I couldn't understand why they were in such a rush. They just bailed out. So he finally gets off the plane, and he looks around and he doesn't recognize where he's at. So he heads for the nearest building after disembarking the plane, and he notices that the base is just completely deserted. So he asked an air policeman where he was, and he was informed that he's in Roswell Air Force Base in New Mexico. It's about 200 miles from the border. You can see here in this map. When he asked if he could leave the base to catch a bus to Denver, which is where he's hoping to get, this air policeman said no, the base was on high alert and no one could come in or go out. Now, this is despite the fact that his plane had just landed. They had just come in. And he said, well, you're on high alert. We're not letting anybody in or out. And he's thinking, that's weird. We just landed ourselves. How can we be on high alert? What he interpreted that to mean was that one person on his plane, since there was no one else around, no one else appeared to be on the base, somebody on that plane was not supposed to be seen by anybody. So they had locked down the base and they wouldn't let him leave. So he has to take a seat in the waiting room for a couple hours until the alert was over. The next morning, Vincent's bus arrives, and he hops a bus. He gets to Colorado Springs. He tells his wife about the strange trip. She's asking, why are you late? So he tells her all the details. That night, they're watching the TV news, just like T.F. White. They're watching the TV news coverage from Dallas. So this would be the 23rd at night. This is Saturday night. And Robert couldn't believe what he saw, exclaiming to his wife, that's the guy. When Lee Harvey Oswald's face flashed up on the screen, he said, quote, that guy looks just like the little guy on the airplane. And she said, are you nuts? Couldn't be him. He's in jail. Vincent said, I swear that's the little guy who got on the plane. So now we have a second sighting of an Oswald lookalike. So what happens to Vincent? Once the CIA realized their secret mission had a loose end, they started battening down the hatches. In the spring of '64, Vincent found out that his neighbors were being questioned by the FBI about him. Not long after, he gets orders from his commanding officer to go to D.C. because there was a special assignment for him, waiting for him in D.C. When he gets to D.C., he ends up 5 days at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, whereby he's undergoing a series of psychological and physical tests. Yeah, he's in the military. He has to do what he's ordered to do. At the conclusion of the 5 days, he says the CIA tried to recruit him. They offered him a lucrative pay package, and Vincent declined. So 3 months later, he gets ordered to go to Las Vegas. And when he arrives, he's informed that he's no longer being asked to work for the CIA. He's being assigned or being reassigned by the Air Force to the CIA for a top secret project. And of course, this was at the infamous Site 51, and it had to do with experimental aircraft. Now, the purpose of the assignment, in Vincent's view, as he starts to put two and two together, these pieces, was to keep Vincent, specifically him, under close observation. They paid him basically for his continuing silence. He was getting two paychecks. He was double dipping. He was getting a CIA paycheck. He was getting an Air Force paycheck. So he was essentially being paid hush money to keep quiet. That's the way he viewed it. During his time at Site 51, Vinson saw a whole scat of other planes with the same tail markings as the C-54 he boarded all the way back in 63 on November 22. That egg-shaped with the lines through it, and all that, the CIA markings. So he knows he's at a CIA base, and he knows that that plane he was on that night was a CIA plane. They all had the same markings. Now, finally, he retires in 1966. And he keeps quiet for the next 25 years, never says a word. But in 1993, he tells this story uh, to news anchor Larry Hatteberg on Wichita's KAKE TV Channel 10 News. And author in 2003, author James Johnston and journalist John Rowe co-authored the book Flight from Dallas, and prominently describing the story of Robert Vinson. That was what the substance of the book was. So now the story's out. So the author wanted to find out if you could land a plane down there in the bottoms of Trinity River. So he consulted Air Force Major William Hendricks about the Trinity River account, and he had Hendricks go to Trinity River and examine it to see, is it possible? Can you land a C-54 on that road down there by the Trinity River? And according to Hendricks, after he examined the area, he said, quote, "It is my personal opinion that a C-54 could easily have landed in the Trinity River floodplain and have taken off therefrom from the depicted area." This is interesting because the Trinity River location was on the perimeter of Oak Cliff. I mean, it's right there. I bet you can walk to it. It is a short walk from where Oswald's rooming house was. It's only 1.3 miles from El Chico's, where T.F. White saw this Oswald lookalike sitting in the Ford Falcon, right? So Vinson's presence on the C-54, it was an innocent mistake on everybody's part. Vinson had asked for the first available flight going from Colorado Springs or its vicinity. And when he was paged and told by an airman at the check-in counter that the C-54 was going in a direction, he just hopped on board. And it turns out to be a fortuitous mistake. Obviously, if the CIA had known, they would never allowed him on that plane. But he got on that plane, and it enables us to see the planning for getting this Oswald, this special passenger, out of Oak Cliff, out of Dallas, since the original accommodations or arrangements didn't work out. Remember, Roscoe Wright failed to get his special passenger out to Redbird. She waited. The special passenger never came. She had to leave. And so now they have to make special accommodations. They turn this CIA plane around in mid-flight over Nebraska, head to Dallas, pick him up, not at an airfield, but at a riverbank, pick him up, fly him out. And then when they land in Roswell, they close down the base so that nobody can leave or enter, so he can make his escape without being noticed. And it just so happens that Vinson was there to see all of it. So now, just adding a little more to the stories, the follow-up, you have what I believe, and these are the conclusions I've come to, is that Dealey Plaza, JFK was killed by snipers on the grassy knoll in the Texas School Book Depository, and several other buildings were set up shop at Daltex building, Records building. I believe there was a sniper under the AAA underpass as well. So it was just a whole phalanx, cabal of snipers in Dealey Plaza. Meanwhile, as soon as right in the direct aftermath, the real Oswald escapes from the Texas School Book Depository. And I use the word escape. It really wasn't an escape. He just left. They were told not to come back to work that day. He left, and he headed back home to Oak Cliff. And I think he was probably told by his handler, because we know he was in the second floor break room waiting by the phone. I'm assuming he got a phone call and was told by his handler to go to his home, pick up a 38 special, pick up a blue jacket, and wait for his ride to the Texas Theater, at which he'd get his future instructions. I believe that's what the real Oswald was doing all this time. Meanwhile, this fake Oswald, this doppelganger, this second Oswald, and Roscoe White, who witnesses Saul run down the embankment and jump in a car. Uh, the second Oswald was also viewed by witness, a Texas, a sheriff, a Dallas County Sheriff Roger Craig witnessed somebody who looked just like Oswald run down that same embankment and get in that same car. So it appears to me that Roscoe White, the shooter, and the second Oswald, the doppelganger, got in the same car, driven by the husky looking Latin type, probably Bernardo de Torres, right? And off they go towards Oak Cliff. Once they get to Oak Cliff, remember that was 12:30 when the shooting took place. By the time they get to Oak Cliff at 1:15, Officer Tippett is taken out by Roscoe White. Remember, I believe Officer Tippett was Roscoe White's uh, spotter, but he wasn't CIA, so he was a loose end. So they took him out, and witnesses said two men left the scene in opposite directions. My thinking is that is Roscoe White leaving in one direction and the second Oswald leading in the second direction. And the second Oswald's job is to attract as much attention as he can on his way to the Texas Theater to lead the police right to the prey. And that's exactly what happened. The real Oswald arrives between 1 and 1:07 p.m. The last time witnesses saw him, he was standing on the corner outside his house waiting for a bus, but there was a police car that picked him up. I believe that was uh, a policeman that was part of the setup, took him to the back of the Texas Theater and let him out, and then headed off to the Tippett scene to participate in that setup as well. Anyway, it's too far for him to walk. It's too far to run. He didn't take it. He didn't end up taking the bus. He still had the bus token in his pocket, and he didn't take a taxi. So I believe it was the policeman. Now, I can tell you the name. Uh, I talk about it in another episode. We talk about the Tippett killing. But anyway, the cop takes the real Oswald to the Texas Theater. He's witnessed there. He buys popcorn from the manager, Burroughs. He gets a ticket, and he goes in, and he sits in the third row on the ground floor, and then engages in some suspicious behavior as he's looking for his contact. Goes and keeps sitting by these people, thinking this is the contact. Nope, maybe over here. Nope, not my contact. It really indicates that Oswald didn't know who his contact was. Never seen him before, so he was guessing. Anyway, this is what the real Oswald was doing. Meanwhile, the fake Oswald is running, walking, haphazardly ducking into doorways and things, attracting all sorts of attention on his way from the Tippett scene to the Texas Theater. He arrives at 1:45. He's attracted the attention of a shoe salesman who calls the police. He enters suspicious, doesn't buy a ticket, which causes the attendant, to call the police, and all of Dallas police descend on the Texas Theater for this guy who snuck into the Texas Theater without buying a ticket. It's a tiny little theater. Maybe it was $1 ticket. I don't even know what it was. He had plenty of money in his pocket, the real Oswald, but this was the fake Oswald. And he's acting suspicious intentionally to draw attention, and he's leading him right to where the real Oswald is waiting. Unwitting, has no idea he's being set up like this. So the fake Oswald enters without buying a ticket. Instead of sitting downstairs, he goes up in the balcony. So when the police enter, they enter the ground floor. They find the real Oswald sitting there. They arrest him, and they take him out the front. Everyone's seen that photo. Meanwhile, a couple minutes later, according to witnesses from a store next door, we're back in the alley, a second Oswald is taken out the back a few minutes later and put in a police car and hustled away. So they were, for example, there was a guy named Bernard Hare who owned a little store 2 doors down from the Texas Theater. When he went out front to see what all the commotion was, there was too many people. He couldn't see, so he went around back to see if there was something in the back. And he got there just in time to see the alley right there. His store outletted into the alley just like the Texas Theater. So they were right there. And he saw this second Oswald get taken away in handcuffs in a police car. He thought that was the guy. And he goes home that night, tells his wife, I saw Oswald get taken out the back of the Texas Theater. And and then they find out in the news that the real Oswald, when they see the footage, that the real Oswald been taken out the front. So Bernard Hare is another one of these guys. Like, well, who was the Oswald that I saw? Looked just like him. Anyway, that's another story for another time. But shortly thereafter, we said 2 o'clock, right? So this is 1:45-ish. The arrest. 15 minutes later, the fake Oswald is witnessed at the El Chico parking lot by T.F. White. The real Oswald's now sitting down at Dallas Police Headquarters, right? Then we have the Trinity River deal with Vincent when they pick him up. The second Oswald is witnessed boarding the C-54 with Bernardo de Torres, probably. And the real Oswald, again, is still sitting down at Dallas Police Headquarters. Then we get to Roswell. The second Oswald disembarks, disappears, never to be seen again. Meanwhile, the real Oswald's still sitting down at Dallas Police Headquarters. And then on November 24th, the real Oswald is disposed of by Jack Ruby. So there can't be a trial. So I think as part of this operation, June Cobb's part, other than setting it all up and putting the people in place, her part, since she was a pilot, was to fly the fake Oswald out after he'd done his job and laid a trail of a very incriminating trail, a very guilty looking trail pointing to the real Oswald. After he'd successfully done his job, he was supposed to be driven by Roscoe White out to Redbird Airfield. Roscoe White just never got out there. He failed. And so she had to leave. And so they had to make alternate plans to get the fake Oswald out of Dallas before someone discovered that there were two Oswalds. This is ZR Rifle. This is the operation that successfully targeted an American target on American soil, set it up so that a patsy would be blamed, also a CIA asset, and the blame would fall on, it was a false flag, it would fall on either another country, in this case the Soviets or the Cubans, to justify an invasion. It was Operation Northwoods, which is what it was. Here's what we've learned through this episode. I went through it pretty quickly, but here's what we've learned. Number one, there was a creation document. It was written 6 days after JFK got out of office. That's a fact. Number two, the guy who wrote it was William Harvey, who was the CIA's assassination expert. That's a fact. Number three, it was a domestic operation with a domestic target. That distinguishes it from executive action, which was a foreign operation with a foreign target. So these are two separate operations. They are not the same. They are not the same. That is a very key fact. There were two assassination programs. One was foreign, one was domestic. One used foreign mercenaries, the other used CIA assets. All right. Another thing we learned is that a cover story was concocted whereby the whole operation would be under the cover of a code stealing operation. That's Harvey's own words. The operation was housed in Harvey's Division D, which only had one purpose, and that was to carry out assassinations. There was no discussion of any of the American target in question because it was such a high value target they could not risk it being discovered, either before or after whom they were after. Another thing we learned is that the finances for ZR Rifle were laundered through Luxembourg. This is very similar to the S-Force. Its finances were laundered through Switzerland. Very similar. We found out that ZR Rifle was signed off on by two deputies, Bissell and Helms, and also by the director of the CIA, Alan Dulles. This is all CIA. We found out that the ZR Rifle only used CIA assets. No foreign mercenaries, no hired hands, no foreign criminals, only CIA assets. For the patsy, for the gunman, for everything. And the pilot, everybody was CIA. We found out that the whole operation was intended to be a false flag to lay the blame at the feet of the Soviets. We found out that a cover file was created, a fake 201 personnel file at the CIA that would create a CIA asset patsy, who the inference would be that he had been corrupted or compromised by the Soviets. In other words, he was a Soviet asset. Uh, we also find out that 10 days after ZR rifle creation documents were authored, Lee Harvey Oswald petitioned for his return to America from Russia. 10 days after. Not a coincidence. We found out that ZR rifle was labeled an operation of, quote, direct action. That is a straightforward killing. We found out that ZR rifle was supervised by CIA officers. It was enacted by CIA agents, and it was blamed on a CIA patsy. And another country was he was smeared with the brush of Soviet communism or Marxism. We found out that ZR represents the code for Harvey's Division D. Rifle is the code for the operation's descriptive word, the weapon that would be used, the weapon of choice. We found out that the time period of ZR rifle was started 5 months before JFK, right? It stopped 5 months after JFK became president and ended 5 months after JFK died. And the creation documents were literally written 6 days after JFK took the oath of office. It's just unbelievable. It was the longest running CIA assassination program, and it spanned the entire duration of JFK's presidency. We learned that a woman named June Cobb or Jerry Cobb or June Corwin, all aliases and codes, was really the primary agent of ZR Rifle, nicknamed or codenamed QJ Win, using the first initial of her first name and the last 3 letters of her last name, alias name, Corwin, to form the codename QJ Win. We learned that she was a pilot and she was a CIA asset, and that she was relocated 1 month after the program began to the headquarters of the operation, which was Mexico City. We learned that the base of operations was codenamed Germany, which meant Texas, and that the field of operation was codenamed Baden-Baden, which indicated Dallas, Fort Worth. We learned that Mexico City was chosen as the headquarters, and she was relocated there because it was the closest CIA station to Dallas, and she was there and located or signed there in June of '61 until she left in '63 to go to the field of operations, which, according to the ZR rifle documents, it said that QJ Win found covert employment in the field of operations. And this was in '63. And according to Bell Helicopter, they hired a Jerry Cobb in '63 at exactly the same time. We found out that Bell Helicopter is more than just a cover job for QJ Win. It was also a cover job for Michael and Ruth Payne, who helped to handle Lee and Marina Oswald in the final months. They set up Oswald's job at the Texas School Book Depository. They kept Lee and Marina apart. There was a lot of evidence that came from Ruth's house that incriminated Oswald. She was a very integral part of this plot. She and her husband both worked at Bell Helicopter. So it was a CIA front company. We learned that in May of '64, at the exact same time ZR Rifle was shut down after Kennedy died, QJ Win received a huge payout. And we know that that was the same time that QJ Win, i.e. June Cobb, Jerry Cobb, June Corwin, whatever you want to call her, her real name was June Cobb, left her cover job at Bell Helicopter and returned to her life before this operation began. We know that the author, Mary Haberstick, was able to develop a relationship with this June Cobb later in life, and from that relationship was able to elicit a confession from her that QJ Win was actually June Cobb, and these aliases, June Corwin and Jerry Cobb, were just that, aliases, and that she was in Dallas on the day JFK was killed, November 22nd, 1963, at Redbird Airfield in a plane, a CIA plane, sitting on the runway, idling, waiting for a special passenger who never showed up. We learned Roscoe White's confession and his role in his failure in getting the special passenger to the QJ win at Redbird Airfield. And then we learned of the story of the special passenger, whom I believe was the doppelganger who was used to incriminate Oswald from the Texas School Book Depository to Oak Cliff to J.D. Tippett's crime scene, through Oak Cliff down to the Texas Theater. And then it was necessary to get him out of town. T.F. White saw him 15 minutes later at the El Chicos. Robert Vinson saw him when his plane did a U-turn in midair when Dallas picked him up, took him to Roswell, and from there he disappeared, probably across the border. That's ZR Rifle. And I think I cannot stress enough the importance of this operation, especially as it relates to the CIA's role in this, Alan Dulles' role in this, and the timing of it, how it spanned JFK's presidency, though the name of the target was never identified in the paperwork and the documents. Circumstantially, it's pretty clear who the target was. The codes that were used to hide identities of the people involved, the codes that were used to hide the names of the field of operations, the base of operations, the headquarters, etc. When Mary Haverstick was able to determine how to break the codes, all the pieces fell into place. It's a fascinating story. All right, that's enough for today. I went on and on and on, didn't I? Feel free to subscribe to my channel, share this with others. Feel free to smash the like button. Feel free to comment. Until next time, God bless. Thank you.